Greetings, I'm Jed Schlackman. I'm a holistic counselor, energy healer, and hypnotherapist, and also an author. One of the books I've published is Consciousness, Creation, and Existence, A Guide to the Grand Adventure. And the topic of today's video overlaps somewhat with the subject of that book, as I'll be speaking about spirituality and metaphysics, about God and gods in religious books, for example, the Bible, the Judeo-Christian texts, and also about extraterrestrial beings and non-spiritual or astral type beings, and how all of those phenomena interrelate or intersect. One reason for bringing up this subject is that a lot of people are followers of religions where they believe that there's a holy book that's the source of their religion, that's a completely accurate account of spiritual topics or historical topics, in essence a pure communication from the spiritual realm or from God, that somehow they have to take word for word and apply that text in their life. That's not really a reasonable or rational approach. First of all, none of those texts are pure communication from the ultimate source of consciousness, or what you might call God. They're all written, transmitted in some way by human beings and or extraterrestrial beings, humanoid type beings, who have personalities, who have mental biases, who have their own individual agendas or allegiances. So there's something filtering that information or that message in some way, often at multiple levels, where it can't be something that's a pure communication from infinite consciousness. It's something of a much more limited, narrow nature, and something that's not necessarily true or accurate or relevant to your life experience. If we start to research the origin of different religious books, and we can use the example of the Bible, you actually have hundreds of different books by different authors just compiled together as if they were one cohesive body of work, but they're not. They include multiple forms of information, multiple intentions and agendas. They come from multiple time periods, written in multiple languages, so it's kind of a hodgepodge of stuff cobbled together to create the appearance of a coherent, congruent narrative that people would be expected to follow and embrace as their doctrine for their religious beliefs. Much of what's in the Bible is not about spirituality or metaphysics at all. There's a lot of supposed history in there, which if you start to investigate and look at other historical references, you'll see things are likely quite distorted in some ways. And a lot of things that are in the biblical books are actually, let's call them edits or alterations or reinventions of previous writings from previous cultures or time periods, from Sumeria, Babylon, ancient Egypt, etc. Even looking into the New Testament and Gospels written supposedly as biographical accounts of the life of the character Jesus, there are elements of those that you can trace back to writings about previous savior characters or sun god type characters. So there's an astrotheological element in many of the biblical books where people or characters in the Bible are at least in part being described in ways where they're representing celestial bodies, where someone such as Jesus is a representation of the sun god character, and some of the scientific aspects of that and astrological aspects, where you have the sun going through the annual cycle, the seasons, where you have the zodiac signs, the astrological months and astrological ages. There's a lot of that symbolism in the Bible, even while a lot of religious orthodox or fundamentalist type people say that astrology is something anti-biblical. The Bible itself has a lot of material that has references to astrological phenomena. And of course, there are some aspects of those biblical writings that do address spiritual principles, and of course there are moralistic teachings in there, guides for people to live a moral or ethical life by society's standards. There's scientific information about life, about things like diet, fasting, cleanliness, so just practical stuff that would help people manage their health or manage their reproduction. That brings us to another context to consider, where extraterrestrial beings were interacting with Earth civilizations and kind of guiding humanity in different projects that they were overseeing, breeding people in a sense in some contexts. So you might have in a religious book material related to sex and reproduction, and the purpose of it wasn't God telling people to be moral. In some contexts it was extraterrestrials instructing people to act in certain ways to serve the purpose of breeding projects, of genetic monitoring and things like that. So you might have a group of people who are intermarrying only within their own racial or ethnic group to preserve the genetics or bloodline. You could have people being instructed to only have monogamous relationships, to only have heterosexual relationships for the purposes of monitoring and tracking those genetic lineages and breeding, not because there is something immoral about other types of behavior. So if we look at cultures all around the planet, and both written and oral traditions, you'll see the very common theme of beings from the stars, what nowadays we call extraterrestrials, interacting with Earth humans and guiding civilizations, educating people, instructing or indoctrinating people in some ways, also manipulating people in some ways. So there's a mix of different intentions or agendas, different purposes that different groups or factions of extraterrestrials have had as they've interacted with this planet and with human races on this planet. So with all of that background context, you can start to look at writings or books of a religious nature in a different way than a religion might have taught or instructed you, to see them more in that greater scientific, historical, and metaphysical context rather than as some type of dogma or doctrine that the creator of the universe or creator of all life was intending to relate to anyone. That ultimate creative source is not this controlling parental figure. It's actually this very sublime, immeasurable consciousness that has the innate drive to explore itself, to explore the potentials of creation, and it's not there to condemn or manipulate or constrict what the beings that are part of existence are going to create for themselves. There may be feedback mechanisms that are playing out spiritual or metaphysical principles that we can learn and understand as they influence what's going to occur in our life experience. But in actuality, the Bible is not a very clear, coherent source for those types of teachings. Those are just kind of sporadically presented there, and often in incomplete and out of context ways. You can find other spiritual writings, both modern ones and ancient ones, that present things in a more thorough and concise manner to help present metaphysical concepts. An example would be something like the Hermetic teachings, and those go back to ancient Greece, to ancient Egypt, all the way back through to the lost civilizations such as Atlantis. And you can find some modern channeled type teachings that we could say come from beings on the spiritual realm or the astral plane, so consciousness that's not currently incarnate. Things like the teachings of Abraham, the Law of One teachings, A Course in Miracles, some other types of metaphysical texts present some basic spiritual concepts, and they do so without all the additional materials that cover unrelated topics. They're not weaving in ethnic histories and political propagandas or things like that. They're just focusing on how consciousness and energy function and how our life experience is generated here on this physical plane, and what the purpose of that is for our soul's progression, for our soul's evolution or self-mastery. So I encourage you to explore more about the background of religious texts from diverse points of view, from a more expanded way of looking at how those texts were created and compiled and edited and altered and so on. And for a broad overview of metaphysical topics, I invite those watching to find my book on Amazon, Consciousness, Creation, and Existence, A Guide to the Grand Adventure. There's also a couple of follow-up books to that one that are valuable. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.